Hey, this is Zach from Rescue Rebuild, and today we're going to be tackling one of our more advanced projects. This is going to be a cat bridge by the time we're done with it. To start, we're going to be using a 2x10 for our shelf. Then we're also going to be using a 1x2. 1x2 is what we cut up for the actual rope bridge bottom. And then finally we have a dowel that we're going to use for the railings for the bridge at each end. This is an 1.25 inch dowel. In addition to that, we're going to need some shelf brackets. These are just nice simple shelf brackets that we get. To hang those in the wall, we use something called a strap toggle. In addition to that, we're going to get some 1.25 inch screws. These are just small general carpentry screws. These are going to be used to attach our shelf brackets to the bottom of our 2x10. We're going to have an 1.25 inch drill bit. This is a special type of drill bit called a Forstner drill bit. We're also going to need two smaller drill bits, a 3/16 and a 1/4 inch drill bit. Then we also need 2-inch screws. These just happen to be deck screws. Really any screw will work fine here. These are also to attach our dowel to our shelves. And to make that connection even a little stronger, I would recommend using a little bit of wood glue. We're going to have an impact driver and a drill. If you don't have an impact driver, that's okay. You can use a drill for all of this. I'm also going to be using a router and a sander. These two are both optional, but they can make the project look a little more professional and speed things up a little bit. And then finally, we're going to be using a latex primer. Really any type of primer is fine, any type of primer designed for wood. Got some good paint to go on top. And then finally, some water-based polyurethane to give a nice cleanable coating to our paint. In addition to all these, we're going to need a saw for cutting the wood to length. And then we're also going to use a table saw to shrink our 2x10s down a little bit and give them a nice crisp factory edge. The first step in this process is going to be to start cutting our 1x10s to length. For this particular one, we've decided to go for a 12-inch length on this board. So the first thing I'm going to do is just cut a nice fresh end on it, and then I'm going to measure 12 inches. I'll cut that, and then I'll do that one more time. Now that we have our shelves cut, the next step while we're at the saw is going to be to take our 1x2 and to start cutting this down. So typically for this, we're going to cut this a little bit shorter than the depth of our shelf. And so since we are going to cut our shelf to 9 inches deep, we're going to cut this to about 8 3/4. The reason we do that is so that when we make this flush with the front of the shelf, it's not rubbing on the wall. So we're going to do the same thing on this. We're going to cut a nice clean end on one end, and then we're going to measure our 8 3/4 and just cut a bunch of these. And one tip is, once you measure out 8 3/4, something you can actually do is take an extra piece of scrap wood and clamp it to your saw right at that 8 3/4 mark, and then you can really quickly cut these without having to measure each one. So we're going to move on to our table saw now. Well, this step is an optional step in this process, but we like to do it because it just makes the boards a little bit cleaner looking. What we're going to do is we're going to use our table saw to cut a very small sliver off of each end of these. We're going to make our first cut at 9 1/8 inches, and we're going to cut one side off of each of these, and then we're going to lower that to 9 inches and then flip them and cut the other side. All right, so now you can see after we've run it through the saw that we've got some nice smooth edges here. The next step is going to be to give this a good sanding. And so we're going to focus on the faces first. We're going to get all these nice and smooth, and then we're going to come back and take some of these sharp edges and clean them up a bit. We can use some sandpaper on a block. We can use an electric orbital sander, or the best way to do it is actually to use a router to put a nice bevel or a round over on the edge to give this a really clean, professional look. Now, one thing I would mention is that when we do put an edge on this, the edge that goes against the wall, we're not going to use a bevel or a round over on that edge because it just creates a place that can collect dirt and dust. So we're going to pick one long side as the side that goes against the wall, and we're just going to keep that totally flat on all the edges. All right, now that we've got our shelves cleaned up a little bit, they're sanded, the edges are nice and smooth, and we've routed the edges or sanded, either way works. We're going to set these aside for a little bit, and we're going to focus on our bridge pieces. Next step on these is going to be to drill our holes to actually make this a bridge. And we're going to go ahead and start marking these out. Now what I would recommend doing is coming in 3/4 inch to 1 inch from the end. I'm going to do 3/4 on this particular one, and I'm going to measure 3/4 on both ends in And then we also want to measure half the thickness of this 1x2. So this is a 3/4 inch thick board. And so half of that is 3/8 of an inch. So I'm gonna do a little mark here. So we've got 2 marks for where we're gonna drill our holes here. But what we're gonna do before we actually go ahead and drill these is to actually use this as a template to mark all of our other ones. And we're gonna use a speed square to line these up. I've got Rogue here. She's inspecting my work to make sure that I'm doing it right. What do you think, Rogue? So we've gone through and marked all of our bridge pieces. We've got a hole on each end. So now what we're gonna do is drill 2 holes, 1 on each of our marks in each of these pieces. Now that we have our holes drilled, the final step for these pieces is to give them a nice sanding. So the big focus here is just making sure that there are no sharp edges on any sides. And then usually the end grain is a little rough, so we want to give that a little extra attention to make that smooth for painting. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. I've got some 120 grit on the sander, and I'm just going to go through and clean these up and get them ready for paint. All right, we're done with our sanding. So all these blocks are nice and smooth. All of our holes are drilled and smooth. So the next step in this process is to prime. So we're going to prime all of these. I'm going to use a latex primer on these. Doesn't have to be latex, you can use an oil-based primer as well. When you're priming, you don't need to focus on getting a solid coat of white. The purpose of the primer is really to keep the paint from soaking into the wood unevenly. And so all we're looking for is that all of the wood is covered. As we do this though, we do want to be careful that we're not getting drips anywhere. We're going to want to leave one side undone so we can leave it down on the wood and it won't stick to our table. Before we prime our shelves, we need to do one more thing to these. We need to install some dowels on here, and what this is going to do is create an end for our railing for our bridges. And so there's 2 things we have to do to make this happen. We have to drill a small hole 3/4 of an inch in from the end, and that will be where the bottom of our bridge ties in. And so the paracord that we're going to use to string the bridge will go through that, and then we're going to come back and drill another larger hole that this will come down into. So there's a couple things we need to do to lay this out. We need to pick which one is going to be our left and which one is going to be our right so that we put them on the right side. Now both of these we left a side that was intended to be the back. So I'm going to make sure that both are facing the same way, and then we're going to go ahead and lay this out. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of our bridge pieces and we're going to line it up with the front side of the shelf. We're just going to use this as a template to mark where our holes are. So I'm just going to draw a small mark right in the center of our 2 holes. Now what we're going to do at each of those is measure down 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to draw an X. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down another 3/4 just to make this first hole look even. And then we're going to add to that half the width of the dowel, so 5/8. So we're going to come down 3/4 plus 5/8. We can use our speed square to come down from that line that we drew. And so we know that's going to be the center of these holes. So to drill this correctly, we have to use 3 different size drill bits. We're going to start with a 1/4 inch drill bit. This is the same size we used for our bridge pieces. This is the correct size for the paracord to string through. So these top 2 holes that we drilled are going to get a 1/4 inch. Now we're going to switch to the other 2 that we did, and we're going to start with our Forstner bit. And again, the reason we use this over another type of bit, for example, like a spade bit, is that this leaves a very clean edge. It gives it a much tighter connection. So I'm going to go ahead and center this on our mark. Okay, so now we have a place for our dowel to go. One final step. We're going to drill a pilot hole so that we can attach a screw from the bottom of these. So what that gives us is a way to screw our dowel onto this shelf. So when this is done, it should look like this. We've got 2 large holes with a 3/16 pilot in the middle, and then we've got 2 1/4 inch holes just on top of them. So you can see you get a nice tight fit on there. And so what we're going to do before we actually install those is use a little bit of wood glue to really secure them. There will be a screw there as well, but by just putting a little bit of wood glue in the bottom of that hole, we're able to really ensure that that's going to be a nice tight connection for many years to come. And the goal here is just to get your screw head just below flush so it's not noticeable. And of course you have the option to come and fill this hole in as well. The last thing I do is check just to make sure this looks straight up and down. This one looks great. And so we're going to go ahead and repeat this on the other shelf and get this other one in on this shelf. And then we are ready for paint. So once these are primed, we're going to want to wait until they dry, and then we want to take some time to go along and just sand all of these smooth. I've got some 220 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to really lightly sand these. You'll feel a big difference before and after. This is very important because it kind of sets the tone for how smooth the paint job is. So if you don't take the time to do this, you're going to have a very rough paint job. Once all of our pieces are painted, is to cover them in a water-based polyurethane. We recommend Minwax polyacrylic in either a satin or a semi-gloss finish. Today I'm using the spray version. We typically use a brush-on version. This is a little bit faster, but it is more expensive. You just have to make sure that you get a nice solid coat on all of the different sides, and we're going to want to do 2 coats on every side. So I like to set up these like this. I'll spray one side, let them dry, spray it again, let it dry, and then flip everything over and spray that last side one more time. What we're going to do is test to make sure that our paracord that we're using fits in this hole. After my tests, I found that a 7/32 drill bit is the best size for this paracord. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to take our beads, we're going to string our beads onto a piece of paracord, and we're actually going to spray them as well to protect them. The beads go in between each of these pieces to give them some spacing. We're at the shelter now with our painted and polyurethane boards. The next step is going to be to attach these shelves to the wall before we can hang our bridge. So we're going to find the back side of each shelf that we made, and we're going to measure in 2 inches on each one, and we're going to attach our shelf brackets using 1¼ inch screws on these. The brackets installed on our shelves, we're ready to start mounting this bridge. The first step here is going to be to actually attach these shelves to the wall, and then from there we'll work on stringing our bridge pieces in between that. So you want to make sure when you find a place for this bridge, the cats have an easy way to get up and down from each side. You also want to make sure that you plan enough space in between for the amount of wood that you have and the amount of paracord that you have. I'm going to go ahead and mount these to the wall, and I'm going to do that by holding them up, putting a level on the back, and then I'm going to mark all of our holes here. With our shelf position marked on the wall, we're going to go ahead and get this drilled and install our strap toggles to mount this shelf. So we need a 1/2 inch drill bit, which I've got set up on our cordless drill here, and then we're going to insert the strap toggle in through that hole. Okay, now that we've installed our strap toggles, we're going to go ahead and mount our shelf. When you're installing these, you want to be very gentle running the screws in, because it's very easy to break off these strap toggles in the wall. Our shelves are mounted, and now we're going to go ahead and assemble the bridge. So we've taken a piece of paracord for each side, we measured between our 2 shelves, and I added about 18 inches to 2 feet of extra just so we don't run out. So what we're going to do is tie a knot at one end of each of these ropes, and I've left about 8 or 10 inches after that knot, and I made a quick release knot so that it's very easy to undo this. This is just temporary while we string this. And then one by one, we're just going to work our way down the bridge, and we're going to install 2 beads, and then we're going to install a plank. When you cut your paracord, what you're going to want to do is use a lighter to singe the end of it, and that will keep it from coming apart, and that'll just make it a little easier to put this together. So we're just going to keep working our way down through this bridge until we have whatever our length is that we measured in between the 2 shelves. So what we've done here is we have tied one end of our back half of this bridge up to the shelves, and all I did was I ran that string up and over into the hole that we drilled when we built these shelves out through the bottom, and then I tied a really good knot, double knot on each of these. Eventually we're going to come back and trim these, but until we get it up and adjusted, I would leave a little extra on there. And you're also going to want to try to get this so the bridge is somewhat centered in the middle. You really just have to get this up and see how it fits. You also want to make sure that this is pretty tight. You don't want this to be sagging too much, otherwise it can move around a little too much and the cats can have a hard time walking on it. So once we get the back on, we're going to do the same with the front. I'm going to lift this up and tie a knot on here. So I'm going to undo the quick release knot that I had made and go ahead and push this through the top of my shelf. And once we get one side in, it can be a little tricky because we need to make sure that the front and back are even with each other. So as you can see, I've got Angel here helping me. She is very excited about this new cat bridge. So we're just going to be very careful to try to keep our tension the same. This is another situation where having another set of hands can be very helpful. So we're going to go over here and do the same thing on this side. And Angel's going to help me pull this through, aren't you? That looks good to me. Okay, so our bridge is set. That's the hard part. And so now we're just going to go back and really tighten up these knots. make sure they're never gonna fail. And now we can go and we can cut our excess off. And we wanna be cutting this pretty close to the knot. And it's why you wanna be sure you get this right before you do it, because you won't be able to tie this again. Once that's done, we're gonna take our lighter and we're just gonna singe the ends of those. So our bridge is in place. As you can see on this bridge, I opted to have one shelf a little lower than the other. It's just a visual thing. You can have them at the same height as well. I thought that would look neat here, so that's what I did. So our final step is gonna be to string our railings. And so we're gonna need to drill some holes in each of our 4 posts, and then we'll be able to make some railings out of paracord. Got our holes drilled. Angel's already testing out the bridge here. And the next step here, and the final step, is to install our railing. What you're gonna do is you're going to basically measure by holding up here how long this piece needs to be. And again, we're gonna leave probably about a foot extra here. And I am actually going to make 2 of those for each side. Now I've made this hole a little bit bigger than the other one. So this is about a 1/4 inch hole. And the reason for that is just to make this easier to get 2 pieces of paracord through rather than just 1. And so you're going to have to work a little bit to get them both in there. The first one will be easy. The second one, you're probably going to have a bit of a fight with. But if you start it and then pull the first one through with it, you'll see it actually pulled the second one through, and then you can go ahead and grab these 2 ends. So what we're gonna do now is thread it through the other side, and we're going to twist this whole railing to give us a little bit more structure, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna zigzag a piece to create the side of our railing. Now what's gonna happen when you start twisting is it's gonna wanna try to spin out, so we can only twist so much before it won't let us twist anymore. But we just wanna make sure that we get the twist as even as possible. And then what we're gonna do is find the right length that allows us to mirror the shape of the bridge. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let some slack out until this is basically running parallel to our bridge. I would recommend leaving a little bit more slack than you think. As we start to run our side piece, you'll see this tighten up a little bit. The last step is to install the side of the bridge. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna measure a piece that is about 3 times as long as the bridge, just to be totally safe. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna tie this to our end bottom of the bridge, right onto the same spot that we tied the bridge to the shelf. We're gonna start a zigzag pattern going up and down into the bridge. And the way we do that is we wrap around a bead on the bottom, and then we go through our crisscross pattern on the top. And so we're just gonna zigzag this all the way down. And as we do this, we need to check our tension and make sure that our bridge is holding its shape while still keeping a tight enough side. And so finally, we're gonna take our end and tie it off down here, just like we did on the first side. Before we tie this knot, we really wanna make sure, one more time, everything's looking good, and then we'll go ahead and tie our knot. We're all done. So we've got this whole side done. We're gonna go ahead and repeat the same exact thing on the back side, and then our bridge will be done. Now that we have both sides strung, we are done with our bridge, except for just going back and cutting all of our excess pieces off. This version of the bridge is just a very simple one. It's very short, has short shelves, it's all one color. You can really get wild with these. You can do 2 or 3 different colors in your bridge pieces. You can paint your beads if you want. You can make longer shelves. You can have 2 on the same shelf, and really just have fun with this. So we just wanted to show you guys the process so that you can customize this to fit your cat room at your shelter. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I know there's a lot of steps to this process. And so give it a shot, see how it goes, and send us your pictures and videos, and we'd love to see how you are helping your local shelters with projects like this one. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can keep up to date with all of our awesome rescue rebuild videos.